Hello, everyone who's joining us. I'm going to start in just one moment.
Tom, where are you, by the way? Where are you based?
I'm based in Amsterdam.
Oh,
What about you?
epic. I'm in New York.
Oh, nice. I used to live in New York.
Yeah, I actually love Amsterdam. Beautiful city.
Yeah, it's really good. Really great. Where in New York are you?
Not too far from John's office.
Oh, amazing. So let's start right in, and we can talk about this in your intros. So hello, everyone who's joining us. We are here to talk about mastering event strategy in a hybrid workplace environment, everything related to programming, costs, and ROI. This is part of our Coffee with Gable and Workplace Leaders series. So some housekeeping rules. Make sure that if you have any questions, just to set up and change your Zoom settings to everyone. Please ask any questions you would like. If you're new to this series, really this is a lot of engaged session, and a lot of the questions are from the attendees. And let's get to know each other. Everyone who has already joined, please share a little bit about your name, your role, where you are. If you're in New York, we're in New York, and anything you would like there. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers. Also myself, I am Lisa. I am the CEO and co-founder of Gable, and I'm based in San Francisco. I'll let Tom lead the way here.
Hey guys, thanks for the introduction, Lisa. So I'm Tom. I work for SentinelOne, and I'm a workplace operations manager, and I'm based in Amsterdam.
John.
Hello, my name is John Germanario. I am the head of people or vice president of people at Pebble Post, a one-person HR team, which I know we'll get to. I'm based here in downtown Manhattan, in New York City.
And Suman.
Hey everyone, Suman, also based in Manhattan, not too far from John, CEO and co-founder of Marco, which is a corporate group travel platform.
Thank you. So a little bit about Gable and Marco. So Gable is an all-in-one platform to help manage your remote and hybrid teams. We have 4 flagship products. One is on demand, basically allowing remote employees to access space globally, HQ management and visitor management, and also event orchestration capabilities here. And I'll let Suman talk about Marco.
Yeah, so Marco helps companies connect their people through events, experiences, primarily that involves, we have a marketplace for experiences, but our primary business is group travel. So that means on-sites, off-sites, retreats, use cases, like full company gatherings, leadership team off-sites, and all that. So can talk more about how we work, but that's high level.
Amazing, thank you. And let's start with a poll for the audience. How often does your company organize offsites? And let's close it. Let's see what we got. Okay, the vast majority is 1 or 2 per year. Interesting. Some small ones is 1 or 2 per month, which is quite prevalent. That's interesting. So in general, what we see that there is quite a big rise of events and meaningful gatherings, whether those are on-sites or off-sites. We see this more and more, just making sure that when people come together, it's intentional. We see much more, I would say, focus on this. This is just a little bit of information from a survey that we ran with Stanford about employees and their gathering or offsite strategy. So you can see it here, pretty much aligned with the survey, I would say. And one more thing to note before we'll go to questions for our panelists is that there is quite a big rise in local and departmental offsites. So less of the large, all company, all hands, but much more meaningful, focused offsites or on-sites that have a task in place in order to deliver. So it's quite interesting in that sense. And would love to hear the audience thoughts on this as well. So let's stop the slides, and we'll start with a little bit of information. And Tom, I'll kick it off to you. If you can share a little bit about SentinelOne's event and offsite strategy would be great, and maybe a little bit about the evolution of it in the past few years.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Lisa. So, yeah, at SentinelOne, we are quite a big organization with around like 2,500 employees and over more than 30 locations. So, yeah, we like to say that we think globally, but we act locally. So, how we put that into practice with our event strategy is by having the employee experience team and the workplace team work together. So, they're basically split by region. And in every region, we kind of look at different things. So depending on culture, size, and local happenings, for example, the employee experience team really builds the global programming by looking at all these regions like individually. And then we also, of course, have like office locations. We have remote locations. So how we split those is by, the office locations, really look at what kind of site it is. Is it an engineering side or is it a sales side, for example? We work closely with the local experience team, and then the workplace team helps depending on the size of the office as well. And for remote employees, we just really, want to drive attendance and how we do it there, because we might not have like someone from the local team available. So we kind of work with like local leads to make sure that they help us drive that need and drive the attendance for those events as well. And where we do it when talking remote locations, it's just like hotspots that we see where we have more than 10 employees in the same kind of location. But overall, I think the biggest strategy is just like our goal is to bring people together to just build the connection and build on the company culture. So we do it kind of separately, but then in the end, it all kind of falls together.
So that's quite amazing, right? Because it's very much aligned with what the data is showing in that sense, right? Because one, you have an overarching goal, which is bring people together, but in addition, you have to do it locally and have someone to lead this, like basically be an extension of your team. And that's much more focused on departmental or local employees rather than, flying everyone to different places.
Exactly.
Which is interesting in that sense. And John, would love to kick it over to you as leading the people function, and you recently hosted an annual company offsite. If you can share a little bit about what the event looked like, what was the programming towards that in general, what events or types of things that you're doing both on a local scale or just for all the company as well.
Sure. Thanks. I think before I get into that, just a quick 30 seconds on my background, which I think helps with scope, is that this is my first startup. We were 40 people when I joined in November 2021, so approaching 3 years. We're up to about 80 now. I spent the first 15 years of my career in HR at large global companies, so 60, 80, 120,000 people. So this has been a culture shock, but in a good way. I really enjoyed the challenge of being a one-person team and actually digging into the strategy, having a bigger impact on the organization from an HR standpoint. I consider myself a builder, so this sort of aligns with me personally. So I just wanted to give my background as sort of a base layer, but we had our third annual, since I've been here, our third all company offsite. We do it annually every year this year. And this was the first time we went outside of New York City. So we're a fully remote team, but about half the team is still locally here because we were, born, if you will, in New York City pre-pandemic and have since dispersed throughout the United States. So it was a big task going from scrappy running around New York, half the people going home, to getting everyone into one location. So we did a full week, which we had never done before. We went out of New York City to Dallas, Texas, which we'd never done before, everyone in the same hotel. And high level, we flew in on Monday. Monday was the travel day with a 5 p.m. kickoff, just a sort of a lighter, casual welcome. We had content for 3 days. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday content, 3 hours of sort of all hands each day. And then the rest of the day, we called it Run the Business. So as a way of not to overwhelm people or have them be distracted in main events, they were allowed to sort of basically co-work for each afternoon. And then we had events planned each evening. And we really, and then we went home Friday. Friday was, Thursday night was sort of awards and, the final closing numbers. And then, a lot of people enjoyed themselves Thursday and got out on Friday whenever it was that they had their flight. So it was a good mixture of intensity and ability to sort of step back because we didn't overschedule the event.
And that's great because again, it does show that you must have a really thorough programming in that sense that you had, and a great mix of business and fun. And maybe a quick follow-up, do you also do local events as well?
So we are this year starting to lean into local events as well. We've actually required each functional leader to have at least one local event. We've got a hackathon coming up for the engine product team actually just next month. Our sales team did an offsite in June. So we're requiring it and making it a part of what we measure our leaders on to make sure that they're at those touch points as well. So local might not mean a New York City, but I would define local for us as sort of functionally local.
Amazing. And that's also pretty much aligned with what Tom said in terms of having a leader. What I like that you even took it a step further in measuring leaders about that. I'm definitely going to ask you more about that later on. That's
Sure.
quite amazing. Someone would love to, I'm sure you've seen so much in terms of events throughout many companies. So because you're working with so many of those, can you share a little bit about, how you're helping companies organize events and offsite? What do you see in terms of trends? If we're talking about, overarching global events or local events, which companies are hosting them more and more, or any data that you would like to share would be great.
Yeah, for sure. I would say the first point would be that the way we work and live has changed a lot, right? So even hearing Tom, you talk about the way, a very kind of strategic lens around multiple offices. What are the cadence of bringing people together? How do you think about this from a local perspective? How do you think about this from a functional perspective? If you think about pre-COVID, right, most companies were in an office or multiple offices, and that was where culture and connection was built. So now we're in a world where that has changed. And I would say the highest impact way to build connection from data is typically some of these events, and whether they're on-sites and off-sites. So that's that bears out in data. So the travel market is massive. It's an $800 billion market. Half of that is group travel. So if you look at data from Brex, which is a fintech company, they measure corporate spend. Corporate travel has increased 3x since COVID, mostly through group travel. Ramp, similar competitor to Brex, they say that 20% of company spend is on travel. A lot of that is group travel. So it's up, but then I would say the other trend is what are the challenges? Why is this hard? The reality is that transient or individual travel, there's a lot of tools for that, right? You can book a flight, an individual hotel, a rental car, whatever it is. There's plenty of technology and platforms to do that. To book group travel, that is not only even just booking a hotel for 10 plus people, but then also thinking about the programming, how to create the itinerary, the content, how to get people excited, how to share the information. Super manual, and often it's you're pulling in folks like John, who's a people leader, but he isn't necessarily a seasoned event planner that spends decades planning offsites. So then you have this kind of new challenge here. So the trends I would say, just to recap, are high, new opportunity to use these to build connection, higher frequency, but execute these well.
Thank you. Super helpful. And one of the things that I do agree is, one, this is basically a new challenge for a lot of people in workplace leaders, is how do you do it at scale? That's one. And the second piece is just how do you extend this to other people, right? For example, in Tom's case, he has regional managers that has to do it. Very similar, by the way, to John at this point. So how do you equip those employees to organize this at scale, right? I think that's also quite a big challenge in that sense, and also an opportunity. Tom,
Tom, I'd love to follow up with you a little bit deeper on programming, on how do you do those, or how do you help those local events and offsites? What are some tactical tips that you would like to share? What are some best practices that you've seen that can work for everyone who's listening and trying to execute those things?
Yeah, so what we also notice is exactly that with like the leaders as well, and like trying to incorporate them in our events too. It also really depends on like the business around different teams and different locations that we have, right? So in Amsterdam, for example, we're more of a sales side. So we have a lot of the sales team here, and we have sales development. So like today, for example, it's end of quarter, it's super hectic, and maybe this is not the right time to host an event. So for example, in Prague, where we are more of an engineering side, it's easier to get everyone off for like one day, for example, to like all get together and like do something. So I think like two great examples that I wanted to share. One, for example, for S1 Cares Foundation is a global initiative where we host volunteering activities for our employees. We do it two different ways in different locations, right? So for example, in Amsterdam, since it's harder as a sales site to kind of block everyone's calendar for a full day, we schedule different events throughout the week. So we actually had it 2 weeks ago, where we planned like 4 days with like part day activities, and the team could just choose like which one of them they wanted to join, for example. And this brought more people to be able to attend. Whereas in Prague, for example, they went on one day with like as many people as they could join to like go tree planting, for example. This is something that would not really work in Amsterdam because less people would join. So I'm really trying to work with like the leaders as well and seeing what they need and what the business need is in a specific location that we're trying to plan these events from. Plus, we also try to incorporate like local happenings to get-togethers. So, for example, all of these things like combined. So, like, for example, in Amsterdam, this weekend, it's Gay Pride. So it's a very big event that's taking place like in Amsterdam. And it's also end of quarter. So we were gonna do an end of quarter drink, right? So what we're doing now, also to bring one more factor into the mix, we have the Out at Sentinel-1 Foundation, which is a great, it's like an initiative. Sorry, I just lost the word, but it's I can't find the word right now, but it's an it's like an initiative where we do events like this. So as part of the Out at S1 Foundation, we're bringing this all together. So we have the end of quarter, which is happening. Then we combine it with Gay Pride, and then we combine it with the initiative for the team there. So now we're inviting everyone on a boat on a Saturday, which is something that maybe on another side wouldn't really work. But we're gonna have a lot of people joining, about 50 of them. So we're really
amazing,
combining all of these initiatives together, which is also really great. And this would only work in Amsterdam, for example.
So I think, and John, I know that you have something to comment, which would be amazing to hear. One of the things that at least I hear that is interesting is the fact that not every activity will work on everyone. It's just you really need to adapt to the type of people and functions, I would say, and also how they work, which also, in a sense, poses a challenge, right? Because you need to be extremely focused on what would incentivize every group, I would say. John, anything to add? What would be your comment?
Well, first of all, that's spot on. I mean, our engineers and product folks at the hackathon, for example, they love just like a nice pizza party. If we took them to a Michelin star restaurant, which our salespeople love, they would eat it, right? So you do have to. But my question, Tom, from you, and this hopefully can help some folks at larger companies too. When you have such a large organization, I'm sure participation is a topic. So how do you enforce not so much the voluntary events, but hey, we're doing this all company meeting when you have such a large population? What are the rules and guardrails you put into place so that you don't have entire teams of introverts opting out? How do you enforce that? And what's your strategy there?
Yeah, I think this is also where it really helps to work with like the local leaders and someone local to kind of see like what is happening and what the team kind of wants. So I was actually just talking to my colleague in Prague who's organizing a really big get together for the team there, and they're gonna do loads of activities, and they're gonna even like stay over somewhere and they love to be outdoors and stuff. And I was like, wow, the Amsterdam team would never, because I know, for example, that here they love, more fancy parties with like a +1 and or they want to party or they want to drink, for example. It's because I'm local and I know what the team here wants. So it's really about like building the connection with the team locally and kind of understanding what your stakeholders are interested in, right? So I would never organize something like that in Amsterdam, for example, if I know it's not something that they would like to do, or if it's something that's like out of their comfort zone. And then for the Pride event, for example, it's also kind of unusual, right? So I know there's some people that, might not really feel comfortable, and it's kind of like out there, it's maybe not everyone wants to be part of an inclusion network, which was the word I was looking for earlier, by the way. So it's really, a lot of like talking to the people is really like my key strategy here. It's like kind of seeing the interest beforehand rather than like planning something and going ahead and then like having 0 attendance, for example.
Thank you.
And John, maybe I'll follow up with you, because you mentioned at the start you're a team of 1, right? How do you manage this? How do you delegate? What do you delegate? What tips do you have in that aspect? What advice would you give other leaders that are working alone or have very small teams to achieve positive outcomes, right, or maximize ROI given goals?
Well, first, I think you need to find the right partner. I worked with Suman's company, Marco, and I think they were a big part of the success of our event, because if you think you can do everything, you'll fail, in my opinion and in my experience. So having the right external partner is important to do a lot of the things you don't have time to do or are not an expert at, like property negotiations and things like that. But we also lean on the functional leaders. I mentioned earlier that we require this of the functional leaders. I will strategize with them on, doing things like Tom mentioned, what works for your local groups, what's going to be most impactful, what things do we want to hit from a training standpoint and organizing the day. But the functional leaders, the C-suite, they are responsible for a lot of that content. And typically what they'll do is lean heavily on our EA. We have one EA here who serves the executive team, but also they'll select 1 or 2 champions from their function. So they might, our revenue team has 24 people, our CRO, our chief revenue officer, he'll select one person and say, hey, I need 10 hours of your week for the next 4 weeks to really help, me, John, and our EA, Maria, to sort of help make this local event better. So that's my advice, is just identifying internally who those people are. And for me, viewing HR as we're an enablement function. We're not we're not just going to do everything. So we're enabling you to have these great events, but we're not here to sort of complete all the tasks. I don't know what's challenging in the market right now for the sellers. Well, I kind of know, but they would know better, right? So, in the revenue example, those are the trainings and events and things that I would expect our chief revenue officer in this example to champion. So that's how we handle the workload balance of being a solo team.
I love it. And I think maybe a follow-up on something that you said before is that local leaders are also measured on that and almost required to do that. Can you talk a little bit about that and like the carrot and stick approach in that sense?
Sure. So on a very basic level, our CEO requires them to have these events. So if they don't have them, that would be an enormous problem. We haven't had that issue yet. But we run after these events, we run a local, 3 or 4 question survey. So after an all company event, and then also after the smaller functional events, and how they score on these surveys is how we measure the success, right? And it's not just about, hey, how did you like the event, but it's how impactful was the content? Was it relevant to your day-to-day, yes or no? And, that's how we measure and innovate going forward. At our large all company event, we measured each session, and one of them performed poorly. 3 out of 4 of them were 90, I think it was 94, 96, and then like 98% as far as, rating it 4 or 5 out of 5. So that's great. But one of them was, I think, like 52%. So we then dove in and said, okay, why did this miss? Let's make sure we don't do it next time. So that's how we measure. It's through surveys, and it's through frankly, just holding the team accountable to actually getting everyone together. And that doesn't mean if there's a low score, we're going to fire the executive, because I think that will then lead to behavior of executives telling their people, make sure you score me highly.
Yeah.
But, it's a talking point, and we have a good culture, or developing a better culture of feedback. And for us, that's been a good way to do it.
That's great. And I think that in general, what the point that you just mentioned of having this constant feedback, I think is really important. Instead of just saying, okay, this is an event to go do, or, just wasting your time. Basically, you want to make sure that it's productive. So I really like that feedback loop, and we see this a lot. At the end of the data will tell us everything in that sense. Someone wanted to ask you a little bit about probably more data questions, but in terms of what you see, I'm sure you see quite an uptick of local or departmental events. One of the challenges that we at least here is focused on costs and how cost effective it is to run these events. Can you share a little bit about your experience, how this is, cost effective? Should company leaders invest in this, given, budget are tight, things like that?
Yeah, for sure. I'll tackle kind of like you're raising 2 points with which John kind of talked about. One is like, I would say the size in terms of kind of like what's the cadence, what's the format in terms of like full company, smaller company, and location. And then the cost is I'll tackle separately. So one is it's really hard to do, with Pebble Post, John, multiple, set 4 full company offsites that are a week long. It's nearly impossible, right? You can't really do that, right? What is probably what y'all do is you have functional leaders, and those could be, as you mentioned, on sites or somewhere, a different city, right? And depending on how you want to optimize for costs and where your employees are. And Liza, you had shared this data earlier around like that smaller format is higher frequency. That has resulted in, by the way, us completely changing, or kind of this new product we're going to launch next month called Instant Offsites, because we used to work a lot with companies, and we still do, around these like larger gatherings where they're 50, 100 plus people. What we find is that there's a lot super high frequency of smaller gatherings where John might tell his sales leader, hey, you gotta, or the CEO might say, hey, you gotta plan this, right? And they're getting maybe a portion of a EA or admin, and they're having to volunteer to spend 10, 15 hours per week kind of planning themselves. So what we do is we have a platform that helps them do that more easily for their group. So we are seeing a lot more of that lower kind of size segment as well. But it really is about the goal. I know that Zillow, CharterWorks wrote about Zillow and how they increased they changed the format of their offsites to be larger so that they could have cross-functional collaboration. So they found that they had smaller ones, and it was like the whole sales team, and then they didn't get to talk to the product team, so they actually increased them. So you have to think about like what the purpose is. From a cost perspective, we like to talk about, when you think about ROI and cost and budgeting, and John, we've talked about this, right? Which is like, we see a lot of people thinking about the cost of rent and travel, which are related in a bucket. And Annie Dean at Atlassian talks about this, which is you have a company and you used to always pay for rent. And by the way, rent in a tier 1 or tier 2 city is super expensive. It's like $1.5 to $3K per employee per month. You might be spending a lot less on rent, sometimes nothing on rent. And then maybe, maybe you have flexible workspace where you don't have a single desk for every person. So we like to say, hey, you're saving a lot of money. If you don't invest in employee connection, you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? So it's not just this like net new cost. You got to think about what you're saving and then what you're spending on. And that's kind of hard for some, especially like a CFO, to understand, to say, hey, wait, why am I spending on this? But if you don't spend on it, the implication, what happens is then your employees get disconnected, and there's a whole long tail of impacts around retention and even just like productivity, right? Do I care about the company? Am I giving my kind of best efforts? Am I working better together? So we have I'll send the materials afterwards, but a whole kind of analysis on, hey, you're probably spending way less on rent. You might spend a bit more on travel. And then what is the impact on that, which I believe is definitely kind of a worthwhile investment.
Totally agree. There's, in general, with the enablement of remote work and hiring everywhere, there is the question of like, how many offices do you really need to have? And then what do you invest instead of having an office, right? And that will probably be those local connections, like those meaningful events and gatherings to increase productivity and collaboration. And totally agree. Tom, maybe a question to you on that, because you have so many. Oh, sorry, John, you wanted to say something? You wanted to.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, while we're on the topic of metrics, I just, there's a lot of ways to measure success that aren't just financial. I mean, you can, there's studies from MIT and Stanford about Slack, email, Microsoft Teams activity going way up, and there's about a 6-month halo effect to that until it flattens back out. But you can measure it by, engineering, right? Have you seen the velocity of your engineering team go up in the 3 months or in the 90 days following an in-person event? Is onboarding of sales new hires from time of hire to first deal closed, does that shrink for new hires that start, 2 days or 2 months within a sales event, right? Is their onboarding truncated because of that? Things like that can actually be measured and potentially be attributed to these in-person events if you look back. So it's not just money, it's there's many things. And for us, we measure finances by quarter and annually, and in the first quarter we had a couple of million shortfall. We got together, for us, our quarters are on the calendar year. We got together the first week of April, the first week of Q2, and I'm happy to report that we're now ahead of target, right, for the year, right? So in Q2, we not only hit our Q2 goal, but we exceeded it enough that we made up the Q1 shortfall and, came over the top to now be ahead of goal. I have to attribute that to the fact that for those 13 weeks, people were feeling that halo effect of collaboration and coming together for a common goal. And frankly, I expect it to level out the rest of the year. So it's really good to tie other things other than money to things like that. And those are just some examples of how you can do that.
That's really strong. Yeah.
I'll say one thing is that people spend a ton of money on rent. I have never seen a company in like pre-COVID be like, what is the ROI of our rent? It was just expected that you, like if you were a startup and you raised money, you went and bought a fancy office in Silicon Valley. I used to live in Silicon Valley, and it's like, that's what you did. By the way, I think it's good that we are now from first principles thinking about like, is this investment worthwhile? But it's not something that people used to do for rent at all. Now you can say, what is the right mix of rent and travel? Is this is it impactful? So it's a good thing, but.
I agree. Tom, how about you? What about, how do you measure, so many events that you're doing in terms of ROI, or what are the goals for those, and how do you make sure that
I think for us it's also like, especially from like a employee experience perspective, like it's also less about the money. For us, the biggest retention tool is just keeping employees engaged. And we noticed that even with the smaller gatherings, and especially doing it for the ones that are remote, like they're so much more appreciative of the get-togethers, like if we organize them. So we actually notice that they are they're staying super connected to the company, to the people, to our mission. And this is our way of like keeping them engaged. And we think that that's also a really great return of investment, right? To keep your employees engaged. And they are even more appreciative of like the get-togethers, sometimes even more than, where we can host like all these fancy office parties for all these people that always come to the office. But then the ones that, do the smaller gatherings, they're even more excited because it's something new and something unusual. And it's like, they're even getting more energy out of like these get-togethers. And we actually started noticing the difference it made, like when we launched Gable for our global employees, and we did these small gatherings that we worked on. So we just got so much feedback. And also getting back on what John said, like we also did a survey to kind of see, what the results were of these gatherings. And we just got so many interesting insights there, and like what works for like different locations, if they want to do something more social after work, or if they just want to like do a working lunch, for example. And it really made us really see like what different areas of the world and different teams that we have like, and we really got such good positive feedback that we feel like the biggest ROI for us is definitely retention and keeping employees engaged.
That's incredible to hear, honestly. John, in terms of budget, so we're talking about, now Tom mentioned, budget is a factor, but not the main factor. But for a smaller company, I'm sure it is, right? So how do you tackle those budgets and event costs? And like you said, I think there are some measurements, and probably one of them, which you just gave a great example, is sales, right? Or productivity and goals. But how do you tackle or set up budget for your events and gatherings for the year?
So an incredibly detailed budget is what I found to be helpful. So if you come to any CFO, in my experience, with, you know, a 5 or 6 line budget, you're setting yourselves up for failure. And by the way, this event we put on this year was 400% more expensive than any other event we had done before, right? So I was coming with a big ask, and it wasn't easy. It took 4 months to plan, right? So I spent 16 weeks trying to convince and re-educate, and here's what we're doing. And, you know, executives saying, well, I don't want to pay for people to drink beer. I mean, I kept hearing that and it was driving me nuts, but I would say persistent.
What do you say to that? Yeah. That's a great question.
Well, you do one thing. You can't plan it last minute. So I had 4 months to at least get the yes, and then another couple of months to plan. So I had plenty of lead time. So I started putting the bug in everyone's ear early because I knew it wouldn't be an easy yes. I had very, I think it was like 100-column line items for everything we were spending money on, so people could see we were serious and organized. And when they said, what can we cut? They can look at that line item and go, wow, everything here is important, right? So I would say giving yourself lead time, having an incredibly detailed plan, and making sure that you're continually re-educating and not getting discouraged about being told no. I mean, it became pretty much a sales job, right? And the funny thing is, our CFO, who, you know, I mean, typical, you know, ex-Goldman, Harvard MBA, like, guy smart as a whip, he's been doing this for 40 years. He went from the biggest detractor to halfway through the event, he grabbed me and pulled me aside. He said, by the way, next year's already approved. Like, just, you know, this was great. You were right. And I know he just appreciated the approach and the attention to detail. So, you know, look, like I said, it was a huge ask that we were coming at it with, and, you know, maybe not everyone can accomplish that, but if you give yourself time to plan, you persistently talk about it, and you have a very detailed financial spreadsheet, those to me are 3 key items in advancing your cause, regardless of how much money you're asking for.
Thank you. One, definitely helpful. I think that from also one of the things that we see is that people leaders work with leaders, they still have to justify. Like, Suman, I totally agree with your point that, you know, a few years ago it was table stakes to have an office and spend so much, but now I think the discussion is much different, and there is always the question of an ROI in that sense. And wanted to ask you as a follow-up on that, in terms of ROI, how do you, when you help companies do those events and gatherings, how do you help them measure ROI and effectively efficiency of those events? And what main metrics do you see that companies are looking at?
Yeah, I would say just like take a step back. It's so interesting, John, what you're mentioning about like advocating to your CEO about the budget. Like, just to acknowledge, this is like a totally new thing, right? So you had pre-COVID, a lot of office spend. Then you had COVID, where we weren't allowed to see each other, right? So no one, and people are getting rid of their offices and so forth. Then people may have done these offsites, onsites, perhaps for the first time. And now people are figuring out what's the right cadence for this, right? And people have sophisticated real estate departments that are used to making big investments in real estate. So I would just acknowledge, like, it's not anyone's fault that they're like seeing these big price tags and they're like, should we do this? How often should we do this? Like, what's the ROI? Like, it's very natural, I think. And they don't really fully understand, oh, I actually am saving money on rent as I downsize my lease and so forth, right? So what we hear is a lot of what you said, John, this evolution around, oh gosh, maybe I should do this. There's buy-in. There's a lot of data coming out, right, from Atlassian, from the MIT report. I think the general consensus is, okay, we need to do this stuff and we need to have a plan. To your point, or to your question, Liza, in terms of like the ROI and the budgeting, the first thing we do is, like, we're a partner with companies, so we help them understand how much this is going to cost, right? Because someone would come in and say, cool, I want to do an offsite or an onsite. I have this budget. We're like, how'd you get that budget? They're like, I have no idea. We just picked a number. And because if you think about it, it's like multiple vendors, you got hotels, you got airfare, you have, food and beverage, all these things. We've done hundreds of these, so we can at least educate you and see this is low, medium, high, depending on what variables, to your point, you want to play with. This is how much this might cost, right? And then you say, okay, cool. I can go to my, I can get 2 nights, 3 nights. What are the variables here? Then in terms of the ROI, right? So first of all, from the ROI, it's like, how much are you spending on this in place of rent, or how do you think about that equation? Then I think there's ROI. The basic things are like engagement, participation, increased connection, and a lot of data supports the fact that the Atlassian report that is continued to be quoted, 27% increased connection that lasts for like 3 to 4 months. That you get this, like it's like being in a long distance relationship, right? You see your partner and you get the big jolt. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm re-energized, amazing. But I think that and the basic equation is like gatherings lead to stronger connection. We're all humans at the end of the day, even if we have Slack and Zoom. When we finally meet in person, Liza, that's gonna be feel better than once we just do a Zoom, right? I believe that to be true. Then you have more connection equals more trust. And then more trust equals better business. That's kind of what I say. However, I think the biggest thing is you can orient these gatherings around big company events, right? So if you're a leadership team, you can get your leadership team together to do strategic planning. And it's going to be helpful to have everyone together because you can build more empathy if you're in a room together. Or training. If you're a sales team, you want to do training, a sales kickoff, new hire, like you can actually orient the gathering around a business thing, a task, a project. And what we've seen, the biggest thing is like we launched this big new product around an itinerary builder, product-led way to build the itineraries for these gatherings. That was ideated cross-functionally in a gathering. So that's a huge win for us as well. So I'll stop talking, but hopefully I answered your question, Liza.
Yes, thank you. And I think just maybe as a final question for the panel from the audience, which I actually really appreciate, and I think it's a tough one, is the culture of, I would say, feedback, right? So both Tom and John, you discussed, having employees being vocal, what they liked and what they don't. How do you even make them vocal? Does it make sense? Would love either of you or both of you to answer.
I think for us, like we really want to make sure that like whatever decisions we make and things that we implement, we just want to make sure that things that come out of like a global engagement survey, something that we do every year, we really want to just make sure that, people feel heard. And if we implement like a new like program or something, like we really emphasize that this is something that we saw in the engagement survey, and this is something that we've seen and we've heard, and we're taking action. And I think by like actively showing that we're taking action, we really build trust, and this really motivates people to, put some more feedback in the next survey, for example. And this just like helps us to continue to grow because we build trust, and they, build encouragement to like just put in all the feedback because they know we are listening to them. So this is something that really works for us.
Great answer. Wow.
I have nothing to add. That was excellent. I mean, we've seen the same thing. Our survey participation has gone up 3 years in a row because we remind people, you have to remind people too, to something Tom said, like, hey, remember, we're doing this because you asked us to, or you said this was important. You can't just do it and then expect people to remember why you're doing it. I mean, yeah. Well done. Great. Perfectly done, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah.
Almost annoyingly bugging them. Like, yeah, no, but it really helps. Yeah.
No, but I think just to summarize what I hear, and I'm sure you can resonate, but there is a sense of like giving them also the responsibility, right? Like this is the tool, this is also on you to collaborate back, right? If you want results, you need to give. So there is a lot of give and get there, which is amazing. I think part of the culture that both of you are building and the focus on those events and gatherings is part of that, right? Like the trends that we see, the overarching view on that, this comes from feedback, right? And listening to employees, because at the end of the day, those are your customers, right? Totally agree on that. And with that, we'll wrap our amazing webinar. It flew so quickly. Thank you everyone who joined. Thank you for the time, for such an engaged audience, for our speakers, and see you next time in the next webinar series. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.